A Journey to the Center of the Earth, Chapter 4, Deeper and Deeper. The next day was Tuesday, the 2nd of July, and at 6 o'clock in the morning we resumed our downward journey. We followed the natural pathway made thousands of years ago by molten lava rising out of the earth. This pathway made for an easy descent because of its slope. After 6 hours following the path, Hans stopped in his tracks. My uncle and I were soon at his side. "We have come to the end of this pathway," my uncle said, and indeed he was right. We were in the center of 4 small, narrow tunnels which crossed each other in the shaft in which we stood. "Which way do we go now?" I asked, hoping that the answer would be back up. But this was not to be. Without a moment's hesitation, my uncle pointed quietly to the eastern tunnel, and without delay we entered its dark opening. The descent in the tunnel was very gradual and twisting. Sometimes we walked through a series of arches, such as might be found in a church, arches which seemed to soar high into the cave, lost to sight. Other times we had to crawl through a series of low, narrow tunnels that might have been made by some animal digging its way through the earth. We walked, we slid, we clambered over piles of rocks, and we rolled down heaps of lava. At 6 o'clock in the evening, after a tough day of climbing, we had gone about 6 miles southward, but less than a mile down. We ate in silence, rolled ourselves in our sleeping rugs, and fell quickly asleep soon afterwards. After a night's sleep, we awoke fresh and ready for whatever adventures might await us on the new day. The tunnel through which we were traveling soon became absolutely horizontal, and at times even seemed to be sloping upward. Finding this upward climb tiring, I stopped, and my uncle, seeing this, came to me. "What is the matter?" he asked. "Are you tired after only 3 hours?" "Haven't you noticed that we are going not down but up?" I asked him. He looked shocked. "Up? How can that be?" he asked, looking at the sloping tunnel. "There is no doubt about it," I said. "For the last half hour the slope has been upward. If we continue this way, we might find ourselves back in Iceland." My uncle shook his head, not yet ready to admit that he had been mistaken by choosing the eastern tunnel. He would not answer me, but started once again moving along the upward tunnel. Hans first, then my uncle, then me. I did not want to lose sight of them. My worst fear was finding myself alone in this underground world. And besides, I reasoned, each step now took us closer to the surface. That in itself was a good thing. At about 12 o'clock, I began to notice a change in the composition of the walls. They were no longer made solely of lava, but of living rock. I walked to one of the walls for a closer look. "What's the matter now?" my uncle called, seeing me at the wall. "Don't you see the different layers of calcium rock and the first indication of slate strata?" I asked. "Well," he said, as if waiting for a lecture, "we have arrived at that period in the history of the world when the first plants and first animals made their appearance on Earth," I announced. The professor never spoke a word. He took a look at the wall, then continued on ahead, leaving me disheartened. "If we have left the lava walls behind, then we are not on our way back up to Mount Sneffels," I muttered to myself. "And if I am right, I should find some remains of these primitive plants and animals." I began to search for these clues of the past. My feet, so long accustomed to the hard lava soil, found themselves walking on a kind of soft dust, the remains of plants and shells. I stopped and picked up an almost perfect shell and ran to catch up to my uncle. "Do you see this?" I asked him. "So," he said, "you have found the shell of an extinct crustaceous animal, much like our present lobster. Nothing more." "Well," I began. "I know," he said. "We have left the lava tunnel, and it is possible that my choice of tunnels was wrong. But we shall have to go to the end of this one to see for sure." And on he went. We had not yet found any water, and we forced ourselves to go on rations. Our supply would certainly not last more than 3 days. I had read of the horrors of thirst, and I knew that being where we were, it would mean the swift end of our journey and our lives. During the whole next day, we made our way through this never-ending tunnel. We no longer spoke to each other, we just walked quietly along. Sometimes the road still moved slightly upward, but more usually it had a downward slant. We saw many other remains of old plants and animals as we climbed. The strata never changed, and I began to hope that either one of two things would happen. One, that we'd reach a deep well and be able to go straight downward, or two, that we'd hit a blank rock wall and have to go back the way we came. But when evening came, neither of those two possibilities had been realized. On Friday, after a night in which I felt a real thirst for the first time, we again began our journey. After about 10 hours of slow movement through a series of tunnels, the reflection of our lights off the tunnel walls grew dimmer and dimmer. At first, I thought that our lamps were going out, but when I placed my hand against a wall, my fingers came away pitch black. "A coal mine!" I loudly exclaimed. "A coal mine without miners," my uncle answered quickly back. We stopped at that point for supper, but I was so thirsty that I could hardly eat. I sat and waited for a few drops of water that were my evening's ration. The others fell asleep, but I could not. I lay in my sleeping rug, counting the hours until morning. At 6 o'clock, we resumed our journey through the coal mine, and 20 minutes later came upon a huge tunnel. It was about 100 feet wide by 150 feet high, a natural cavern cast apart by some underground disturbance thousands of years before. As I gazed at the wondrous cavern made up of vast layers of coal, an uneasiness fell over me. What was bothering me? Then suddenly I knew. My nose had detected an odor of gas. The cavern was filled with a dangerous gas, which coal miners call fire damp. One spark could set off an explosion that would kill all of us instantly. Luckily, we lit our way with battery lanterns and not flaming torches, or we would all be dead. We left the cavern and continued on our way along the dark tunnel. It was so dark that we could not see more than a few feet ahead. My uncle was impatient for the road to cease its horizontal direction and start heading downward. I felt that the tunnel would go on this way for months. Suddenly, at 6 o'clock, we came face to face with a blank wall. To the left, to the right, above and below, there was no place to go. We were at a dead end. We stood and stared at the wall, wondering what to do next. Finally, my uncle spoke. "Well, so much the better," he said. "At least we know we are not on the road taken by Arne Sarkism. All we have to do is go back. Let us rest tonight, and within 3 days we shall be back at the point where the 4 tunnels began." "If our strength lasts that long," I said with some bitterness. "Tomorrow there will not be a drop of water left. It is almost gone." "And your courage with it?" my uncle asked in a severe tone. What could I say? I turned around and fell asleep, dreaming of water. I would have gladly traded a diamond mine for 1 glass of cool spring water. End of chapter 4.